Caden told me over bitter too dark coffee. "Dad, you're too old to live here anymore," while the hum of the fridge filled the silence. I'm Lyle Harrow, 62, a retired internal controller. Fingers still steady on the cool rim of my untouched porcelain mug. Ever had one moment and one intact keepsake? Spark a change you didn't see coming. The kitchen smelled faintly of burned toast and Mira's sea salt candle. When Caden looked up from his coffee and said, "Dad, you're too old to live here anymore," his voice was flat like he was delivering a market report, and the words clung to the warm air the way smoke does after a blown-out candle. For a second, the hum of the refrigerator filled the space, louder than his voice, and I found myself watching the steam curl off his mug, just so I wouldn't have to meet his eyes right away. I didn't answer, not because I didn't hear him, but because I wasn't sure which part of me should speak first, the father who raised him, or the man who now feels like a guest in a house he once helped pay for. The sunlight came in through the sheer blinds, catching on Mira's designer mug as she moved it from one counter to another. Her robe was soft blue, and her face, as always, perfectly put together for a morning at home. She didn't say anything, just folded napkins into neat triangles, as if this were another staff meeting she had to stage manage. I could feel the taste of the coffee in my mouth, bitter and sharp. Caden liked it strong black. Something about real flavor, he always said. My throat missed the mild roast Elaine used to brew. Across from me, Caden adjusted his watch, the one with the black leather strap he liked to flash in client meetings, and continued. "We've been thinking, it might be better for you, Dad. A smaller place. Something easier to manage." He spoke like a consultant offering a friendly upgrade, not a son asking his father to leave. His shirt sleeves were rolled neatly to the elbows, and he tapped the spoon against his cup, a slow, steady rhythm. I kept my gaze low on the empty patch of wall where Elaine's framed photo used to hang before Mira redecorated last winter. There was just a pale square left. A ghost of where she once belonged in this house. I nodded like I was hearing something reasonable, though. Each word felt like a hand pressing on my chest. Mira's nails clicked softly as she stacked plates by the sink. She finally said with that careful smile of hers, "We just want you to be comfortable, Lyle. You deserve a place that feels your own." Her voice was warm enough, but it carried the same polished emptiness as the staged coastal art she hung in the hallway, seashells and pale beaches I'd never walked on. I wrapped my fingers around my chipped mug, the one they'd threatened to throw out more than once, and pretended to sip. Breakfast went on in muted motion, silverware clinking, the hiss of the espresso machine, the faint sound of traffic outside. I made the small talk they seemed to expect about the weather and the new neighbors, though none of it landed. Caden excused himself to check emails before work, his leather shoes clicking on the hardwood as he left. Mira stayed behind to wipe down the counters, humming something tuneless under her breath. I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the silence they left me in, heavier than their words. That evening, after the house settled into its routine of dimmed lights and muted television murmurs downstairs, I retreated to the study upstairs. The room smelled of old paper and the faint clean scent of polish Mira's cleaning crew preferred. The blinds were drawn, letting in only a line of fading gold across the desk. I reached into the bottom drawer where I'd tucked a small, dust-coated photo of Elaine holding a toddler-aged Caden. Both of them grinning, oblivious to how years can turn easy warmth into something transactional. I wiped the glass with my sleeve the way I used to clean her reading glasses when she couldn't find a cloth. On the corner of the desk sat a small brass key. It felt heavier than it used to when I picked it up, cool and solid between my fingers. The quiet in the house was total, no hum of conversation, no Mira asking about vitamins. Just the distant buzz of the fridge 2 floors below and the faint creak of a settling beam. I crossed to the closet, pushed aside a stack of Mira's extra throw pillows, and opened the small wall safe. The lock turned smoothly, a satisfying click echoing in the stillness. Inside, under a folded envelope of old tax documents, was the crisp edge of the deed. The bank seal glinted under the light from the hallway. My fingers rested on it longer than necessary, not for the value it represented, but for the simple reminder that not every decision about my life was theirs to make. My jaw tightened, a muscle I hadn't felt in weeks waking up. I closed the safe, slid the brass key back into my pocket, and set the photo gently atop the steel box as if to anchor it there. The study felt a little cooler now, a draft slipping through the baseboard. I whispered low enough that the air might swallow it. Not yet, and shut the drawer. The key pressed against my palm as I walked out, each step deliberate, the soft thud of my shoes on the hardwood, sounding louder in the quiet than it ever had before. The hum of the air conditioner was struggling against the damp July heat when I heard Mira's voice slip through the half-open hallway door. "We can't keep covering the HOA fees. If we sell, we'll be clear." Her tone was soft but strained, like she was reading a number she didn't want to believe. I held still in my office chair, back to the door pen, resting against an old ledger as if I were mid-note. Caden's sharper voice followed, clipped and impatient. "We're already late on the second quarter dues. The lawn service is threatening to pull out, and the tax bill's sitting there. It's not sustainable, Mira." A cicada outside buzzed loud enough to make the walls hum, then went quiet, as if even it were listening. I let their words roll down the hallway, counting them like I once counted quarterly losses in a boardroom. Not because I needed to, but because the rhythm steadied me. Mira's steps paced softly over the polished floor, her voice dropping. "If we sell before fall, we can clear the cards and still keep the condo in Newport. But we'll need Dad to sign off, or at least..." Her voice faded as they moved toward the kitchen. I didn't move until the sound of running water and a cupboard door told me they were distracted. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish from Mira's cleaner and the dry, musty paper of binders I'd kept for decades. They were stacked along the wall like old soldiers' tax years audit reports, copies of invoices with companies that don't even exist anymore. I turned back to my desk, slid my finger along the worn spine of a 2015 ledger, and opened my laptop. The screen's light glowed in the dim room, a soft hum rising from the fan. An unread email blinked in the corner of the screen, but I minimized it first. Old habits making me check the audit spreadsheets I'd kept up to date even in retirement. A lifetime of double-checking numbers doesn't just die because someone thinks you're past your usefulness. I opened the bank portal, fingers steady on the keyboard, ignoring the muffled thud of a cabinet door down the hall. The screen refreshed, lines of text rolling upward, and then a message in bold title remained solely under Lyle Harrow, 401k active, balance secure. For a moment, the glow of the monitor reflected on my glasses, and I caught my own face looking back, older lined, but not yet the relic they seemed to think I was. I reached for my coffee, the chipped mug patched with yellow tape Mira hated. The tape had been there for years, a quick fix I'd refused to throw away, like so many things she deemed clutter. The ceramic was warm, the coffee bitter and a little stale, but familiar. Leaning back, I let the chair creak beneath me and murmured just loud enough for myself. "Still mine." The words didn't taste bitter like their coffee. They were steady grounding. The cicadas started again, their song rising like static, and the sound of a car engine outside faded as the neighborhood settled into late afternoon. I clicked open the blinking email, letting the first few words scroll by generic bank language. No surprises, and then closed it. I didn't need to read it all. The portal already told me what mattered. A drop of rain tapped against the window, then another, soft at first, then a rhythm like fingers drumming on a desk. The air shifted cooler, the light dimming as clouds gathered. I reached for a pen, scribbled a note on a yellow pad, just a time and a name, and tore the page off carefully. The sound of it ripping seemed louder than it should have, but no one called up to check. I opened a new email window and began typing slowly. Each letter deliberate, a message to Harold May, the banker who'd handled my account since before Caden was out of grade school. Outside, the rain thickened, rolling down the glass in slow, lazy rivulets. I kept the lights low, the room a dim cocoon of hums and faint tapping my fingers, pausing over the send button. I glanced once more at the chipped mug beside me, the thin crack running through the glaze, sealed with tape, but holding firm. The window rattled softly in the breeze as I clicked send and sat back, the glow of the screen washing over the binders stacked behind me, casting long, patient shadows across the office walls. The diner smelled of coffee and warm syrup, the kind of scent that lingers in the air and clings to your clothes long after you've left. Selma slid a laminated menu toward me, her thin fingers tapping the corner as she said, "Why let them write your ending, Lyle? You still hold the pen. Her voice was even, but it carried that gentle weight only someone who's lived long enough to recognize resignation can manage. I looked up from my black coffee steam, curling like the early morning fog outside, and studied her face. Sharp eyes behind modest frames, silver hair pinned neatly, lips pressed in a line that told me she wasn't asking for conversation so much as she was challenging me. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the slight chip on the rim beneath my thumb. The diner was quiet except for a faint gospel tune playing from a radio behind the counter and the occasional clink of a plate as the waitress humming softly cleared a booth. The checkered floor stretched between us and the windows streaked with condensation from the humid August air. I didn't ask them to, I muttered, staring into the dark swirl of my coffee. They just decided somewhere along the way I was a problem to solve. The words felt heavier out loud, as if saying them gave them shape. Selma didn't flinch. She flipped the menu shut and leaned in slightly. You spent 30 years as an internal controller, didn't you? You audited contracts, caught errors no one else could find, and flagged the fine print before it cost people their jobs. That's not a skill set you just misplace because your son thinks you're inconvenient. She reached into her canvas tote and unfolded a thin document, sliding it toward me. I've seen this before. Power of attorney. They'll make it sound like it's for your convenience, but if you're not careful, it's your signature that gives away the steering wheel. The paper smelled faintly of ink and old envelopes, the corners worn soft. I glanced at the clauses and the neat boxes where someone's initials should go the way I used to glance at financials that weren't supposed to leave the office. A waitress stopped by, setting down a plate of pancakes that steamed against the cool diner air. The scent of maple syrup cut through my thoughts, familiar and grounding, like Elaine's Sunday breakfast before the world tilted. For a moment, I could almost hear her laugh, soft and melodic from across the years. My chest tightened not with grief so much as with a strange clarity. I'd been through harder losses than my son's casual dismissal. Selma watched me for a beat, then nudged the plate toward me. Eat, Lyle. You'll think better on a full stomach. We ate in silence for a few minutes, just the scrape of forks and the murmur of a couple near the door. When we finished, Selma slid a business card across the table. St. Luke's Church is putting together a free workshop for retirees, basic finance understanding scams, managing what we still have. They need someone who can read statements without falling asleep. You'd be good for it. Her eyes softened a fraction. It's not just about fighting them, Lyle. It's about proving you're still building something for yourself, too. Outside, the late morning air hit me with a damp warmth, and the church bell in the distance began to toll deep and slow. I caught my reflection in the diner window shoulders, a little straighter than when I'd walked in, the faintest trace of syrup on my sleeve. No one writes me off yet, I whispered the words, fogging against the glass for a heartbeat before fading. Selma gave me a small nod as if to say she'd heard me even without trying. The drive back to the house was uneventful, the streets lined with overgrown hydrangeas and the sound of cicadas buzzing from the trees. I parked and walked in through the side door, the cool air of the house washing over me. Mira's perfume, something floral and calculated, hung faintly in the hallway. From upstairs, a drawer slid shut, and when I reached the landing, I saw her through the sliver of the study door. She was crouched by my file cabinet, fingers lingering over a yellow folder marked title, her expression calm, lips pressed tight as if she were counting seconds. She didn't see me yet, and I stayed quiet. Hand resting on the railing, the echo of Selma's warning still sharp in my mind. The faint rustle of papers filled the air, and I stepped back into the shadow, the creak of the floor under my heel, quieter than my pulse in that moment. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the living room, sharp and sterile, coating the air with a faint chemical tang that felt nothing like the house I had lived in for years. The walls were bare now, every nail hole filled, every shelf cleared. Even the old rug Elaine had chosen was rolled up in the corner, its edges fraying slightly as if protesting its exile. I stood by the window, the late August light spilling in pale streaks across the hardwood, watching as Mira, her hair pulled into a precise knot, gently lifted the only family photo left on display. She slid it into a cardboard box padded with tissue paper and said softly, as if she were offering comfort, "This place needs a new chapter, Dad." Her tone was tender, her gaze anything but. I knotted the polite mask firmly in place, while my eyes followed her hands as she tucked the photo between folded linens. The faint scrape of the box against the floor was louder than either of us speaking. Down the hall, I could hear Caden's voice rising and falling through the half-shut office door, clipped and sharp. Refinancing isn't optional. We need a bridge loan before October. Each word sounded like a hammer tap, not frantic, but urgent enough to make Mira's smile a fraction tighter. She glanced toward the sound, then back at me, holding up a neat stack of papers clipped together. "Dad," she began, moving closer, her heels making soft taps on the bare floor. "Caden and I thought this might make things simpler. Just a power of attorney so we can handle any sign-offs or paperwork for you. No stress for you, no confusion." Her voice was all warmth, the kind you use when coaxing a cat into a carrier. I took the papers, flipping through them slowly, my thumb tracing the neat signature lines and the faint ink smudge near the bottom margin, the only imperfection in Mira's otherwise immaculate presentation. I kept my expression mild, even letting my lips twitch in something like gratitude. "Of course," I murmured, retrieving my pen from the table. The tip clicked softly, the sound punctuating the quiet like a metronome. I signed the first page with an easy flourish, deliberately letting the ink pool slightly at the loop of the L, knowing they'd be too pleased with my compliance to notice the hesitation in my hand. When she stepped away to answer a text, I flipped to the second page, left it blank, and quietly slid it beneath a tax folder on the desk. "You're sure this is necessary?" I asked lightly as she returned, keeping my tone casual, even curious. Mira smiled thinly, smoothing her skirt. "Just a formality. We'll take care of everything." That evening, when the house had quieted and their voices had faded into the bedroom down the hall, I slipped into the study. The desk lamp cast a warm cone of light over the leather briefcase I had pulled from the closet. Its surface creaked softly as I opened it, the scent of oiled leather and dust rising faintly familiar as an old overcoat. I removed the original deed from the safe, the paper stiff and cool beneath my fingertips, the embossed bank seal pressing a firm circle into the pad of my thumb. For the first time in months, my hands felt steady, not because I had a plan fully formed, but because I knew there was a line they couldn't cross, not yet, not without me. I placed the deed in a heavy plastic sleeve, zipped it into the inner pocket of the briefcase, and locked it with a snap that sounded louder than expected in the stillness. The faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs was the only other sound in the house, and it faded beneath the click of my laptop waking. The glow of the screen painted the room in cold light as I opened a new email draft. Fingers hovering briefly over the keyboard before I began to type. Title transfer inquiry, confidential. Each word appeared slowly, deliberately, as though the act of writing them was anchoring me. I hit save instead of send, leaning back in the chair, the leather creaking as I exhaled. The briefcase rested against my leg, weighty and solid, its presence grounding me. I rubbed my thumb over the bank seal one more time, feeling the raised edge like a reassurance. Outside, a breeze shifted through the half-open window, carrying the faint scent of rain from the coast, and the distant hum of traffic blended with the rhythmic chirp of crickets. Just as I began to close the laptop, a soft ping sounded, and a calendar notification popped up on the corner of the screen. Prestige Motors, Tuesday 10 a.m. The words glowed in the dim light, small and quiet, but carrying a promise I hadn't let myself feel in years. I closed the screen with a click, the room dimming to shadow again, and sat for a moment longer, listening to the muted house breathe around me, the briefcase under my palm, like a pulse of its own. The glass doors at Prestige Motors slid open with a hush, letting in a swirl of crisp October air and the faint scent of fallen leaves from the parking lot. I stepped inside my leather briefcase, bumping gently against my knee, the familiar creak of its handle sounding louder than it should in a space so polished. The showroom stretched wide under cool white lights, every surface gleaming the floor, so reflective it made the Maseratis and Bentleys look like they floated. Pierce, the salesman with slicked-back hair and a practiced smile, straightened from behind a counter as soon as he saw me. His gaze flicked once over my worn navy blazer, the frayed cuffs, and his polite smile wavered just a fraction. "Good afternoon, sir," he said. stepping forward, his tone professional, but carrying the faintest edge of doubt. Looking for anything in particular today? The low hum of the dealership's ventilation filled the pause between us, and I took a moment to glance around. A white Gran Turismo sat on a raised platform under a spotlight, its chrome catching the glow like it was basking in applause. That one, I said, nodding toward it. Gran Turismo, correct. What engine package? Pierce's brows lifted slightly, the corner of his lips tugging into something between surprise and restrained amusement. Yes, sir, this one's a 4.7-liter V8 naturally aspirated, 454 horsepower, 0 to 60, in about 4.7 seconds. 6-speed automatic, but with paddle shifters. He gestured with a polished brochure, but I waved it off gently. I stepped closer, leaning to inspect the brake calipers, tracing a finger just above the wheel arch without touching. Brembo brakes, right? Ventilated rotors. What about the differential limited slip or electronic? His polite skepticism cracked into a flicker of respect. Limited slip. Standard for this trim. He said a little more earnestly now. I opened the driver's door, the hinge whispering smoothly, and eased into the leather seat. The cabin smelled of fresh hide and faint adhesive, the touchscreen glowing faintly even with the engine off. My fingers rested on the steering wheel, tracing the Trident logo embossed in the leather. I could see my reflection in the glossy instrument cluster, older, sure, but steady-eyed, not the helpless figure Mira and Caden liked to picture when they spoke about what's best for Dad. Pierce cleared his throat. Would you like to take it for a spin? His tone was warmer now, curiosity edging into respect. Of course, I said, pulling my wallet from my inside pocket. I handed him my driver's license, and after a pause, a folded cashier's check with the bank's embossed seal. We'll do the test drive, I added casually, but I'll pay in full if it feels right. Saves everyone time. For a moment, his hand froze on the check. The faint whir of a money counter from somewhere behind the glass office walls seemed louder than usual, the sound bouncing off the showroom tiles. His professional mask broke into a genuine smile as he nodded. I'll get the paperwork ready while they bring the car around. He turned to step away just as the glass doors whispered open again. Mira's heels struck the tile, first quick, confident, followed by the lower, even cadence of Caden's shoes. They were laughing softly about something, a note of triumph in her voice, before they noticed me sitting in the Maserati. Both froze mid-step, the laughter dying on cue. Caden's eyes darted to the cashier's check Pierce had just placed on the counter, his jaw tightening as he caught my name on the payee line. Mira's smile flickered, her hand hovering near her necklace, as if she needed to hold on to something solid. Pierce, oblivious to the undercurrent, returned with the key fob in hand, his voice bright. Mr. Harrow, everything's set. You're good to take her out. He held the fob out, and as I reached for it, Caden whispered just low enough for only us to hear, Dad. What is this? His voice was a mix of confusion and disbelief, like a man watching the ground shift under his feet. I let the corner of my mouth curl upward. Not quite a smile, not quite a smirk. A car I like, I said, simply fingers closing around the cool metal of the key. The dealership lights glinted off the Trident logo as I rose from the seat, briefcase in hand, and followed Pierce toward the front. Behind us, Caden stood stiff, Mira's reflection in the glossy hood, showing her wide eyes and tightened jaw, as the autumn wind outside pushed a few stray leaves across the glass doors. The Maserati's engine purred to life, low and smooth, vibrating through the leather as I shifted into gear. The glass doors parted, the faint hiss of the wind slipping into the warm air of the showroom, carrying with it the crisp scent of fallen leaves. As I eased the car forward, I caught Mira's reflection one last time in the dealership window. Her face still, lips pressed into a silent line, the kind of look people wear when they realize the story they've been writing isn't the one playing out anymore. The tires whispered over the polished floor before meeting the grit of the parking lot, and the autumn air felt cooler, sharper as I steered toward the open road. For the test spin, the engine's growl drowning out everything I'd left behind in the showroom. The aroma of roast chicken hung thick in the air, laced with rosemary and garlic, when Caden and Mira stepped through my apartment door. Their eyes didn't linger on me first. They flicked to the Maserati key resting casually in the dish by the entry table, then to the framed deed and photo set side by side on the wall. Mira's lips curved into a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Caden's jaw worked silently, a muscle twitching at the corner. I took their coats without comment, the jazz murmuring from the speaker, softening the silence that trailed behind their entrance. The living room glowed warm under the soft amber lights. Shadows of the wine glasses stretching long across the table, where a bottle of Bordeaux breathed. My apartment wasn't grand, 2 bedrooms. Modest furniture, but every piece was chosen by me, not inherited, not dictated. The leather armchair by the window, the simple oak dining table, even the muted rug beneath our feet, all mine. Mira's eyes darted around as she set her handbag down, cataloging everything, perhaps searching for a weak thread to tug. "Smells wonderful," she said finally, smoothing her skirt as she sat. Her tone was measured, practiced. Caden hovered a moment longer before settling into the chair opposite me, his fingers drumming against the polished wood. "You didn't have to go to the trouble, Dad," he said. But his gaze kept drifting toward the wall where the deed hung, the gold notary seal, catching the light like a quiet warning. I poured the wine slowly, the deep red swirling into each glass, with a soft glug, the scent of dark berries rising between us. We started with quiet bites, the clink of silverware, and the muted saxophone in the background filling the gaps where conversation didn't. Mira was the first to breach the silence, setting down her fork with deliberate care. "Dad, we've been thinking," she began, her eyes fixed on the rim of her glass. "You've done so well on your own, but maybe it's time to plan ahead, for you know future care. So you're comfortable." Her hand brushed a strand of hair, back nails tapping once against the stem of her glass, the faint click punctuating her words. Caden cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly. "What Mira means is, we could help streamline things. Make sure your investments, your accounts, everything's secure. Less for you to worry about, more predictable returns. I know people at Horizon who could." I let him talk, his words rolling over the table like a pitch he'd given a dozen nervous clients. My hand rested lightly near the slim folder labeled "Notary Copies" on the chair beside me, unseen by either of them. I took another sip of wine, let the silence stretch a beat longer than comfortable, then gestured casually toward the wall. "This," I said, nodding to the deed, "and everything else stays under my hand." My voice was calm, even, but it cut through the room sharper than any raised tone could have. The ticking of the wall clock became suddenly louder, each second stretching. Mira's lips pressed together, her smile thinning into a pale line. Caden's fingers stilled against the table, his posture stiffening as if someone had just closed a door he'd been certain was open. The jazz in the background slid into a lower register, a slow trumpet weaving through the tension. I raised my glass, the faint chime, as it met theirs, barely audible over the steady tick of the clock. "To choices," I said softly, my gaze steady on both of them, "mine, not yours." The words weren't loud, but they carried, filling the warm room with a weight that needed no echo. I took a measured sip, the wine smooth and dry, and set the glass down with care, the base landing with a soft thud that seemed to mark a line none of us could pretend wasn't there. Across from me, Caden's knuckles tightened around his wine glass, the tips of his fingers blanching as he tried to hold his expression steady. Mira glanced at him, then back at me, forcing a brittle smile that barely curved her lips. "We understand, Dad," she said, her voice smooth but lacking its usual shine, each word measured as though she were choosing them from a script she hadn't rehearsed enough. The saxophone wove softly in the background as we finished the meal in silence, the clinking of utensils, and the steady clock, the only sounds threading the air. Outside, a breeze rattled the window just enough to make the shades sway. The faint shadow of the Maserati keys cast long across the table by the shifting light. The first snow of December drifted past the window, soft and unhurried, when Selma arrived at my door with a cardboard box tucked under her arm. She brushed a dusting of flakes from her coat as she stepped inside, her eyes catching on the framed deed and family photo hanging above the console. A smile flickered across her face, not the polite kind, but one of quiet approval. "I see you've claimed the walls," she said, easing the box down onto the coffee table as the fire popped gently in the hearth. Outside, a distant carol floated from somewhere on the street, faint and warm as the early evening settled over Providence. The living room glowed with the soft crackle of the fire, the scent of pine and a hint of cinnamon from the candle I'd lit filling the space. I sat back in the armchair, a notepad balanced on my knee, my pen poised above a half-finished list. Selma pulled out a stack of pamphlets from her box, some folded, others blank, and spread them across the table. "St. Luke's wants to launch in January," she said, her pen tapping a slow rhythm against the top pamphlet. "Financial literacy for retirees, how to read statements, avoid scams. Keep what you've earned. They need someone who's been in the trenches, not just another smiling face." Her gaze met mine, steady and pragmatic. "You could do it in your sleep, Lyle." Steam curled upward from the mugs of tea between us, tracing invisible lines in the warm air before disappearing. I reached for mine, the ceramic warm against my palms, and let the quiet settle before answering. "It's been years since I taught anyone anything," I murmured, watching the snowflakes gather in soft piles on the sill. "Feels strange thinking about standing in front of people again, even for something as simple as this." The corner of Selma's mouth quirked upward. "Strange, maybe. Necessary, definitely. You've spent months defending yourself. Time to do something that builds instead of shields." We spent an hour drafting the first flyer, the scratch of Selma's pen and the crackle of the fire, weaving a kind of rhythm to the work. She wrote headlines, I sketched bullet points about budgeting, spotting predatory fees, making sense of 401k rollover skills I'd carried for decades, now repurposed for anyone willing to listen. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to make the eaves creak softly, and a pair of headlights swept briefly across the window, glinting off the Maserati parked by the curb. The car gleamed like a sentinel in the snow, less a trophy than a quiet reminder of the freedom I'd carved out and of the restraint it took to keep it just that. As Selma gathered the drafts into a neat pile, she reached across the table, her hand warm and steady over mine. "You turned their slight into something better," she said, her voice even, but threaded with something softer. The firelight caught in the lenses of her glasses, a flicker of gold that made her look almost ethereal for a moment. I didn't answer, just tightened my fingers slightly around hers. The weight of her hand, a grounding thing. When she left, the living room felt fuller than it had in months, the lingering scent of her lavender hand cream, mixing with the pine and cinnamon. I sat back down, the notepad, now resting on the table beside the neatly stacked flyers. My eyes drifted to the bold title Selma had written in looping script across the top sheet, "Starting over at any age." I traced the words lightly with my finger, the paper cool under my touch, and let the fire's warmth sink into my bones as the snow outside muffled the world to a peaceful hush. ChatGPT said. The scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries floated through the open doors of St. Luke's Community Hall, mingling with the soft notes of sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. 24 retirees shuffled into folding chairs, their conversations low but tinged with a kind of curiosity, a hint of relief. Some clutched notebooks, others wrapped their hands around steaming paper cups, the scent of cinnamon rolls wrapping the air in warmth. Selma moved easily among them, handing out printouts, her canvas tote resting by the lectern. I stood near the projector screen, the first slide glowing behind me, hands steady on the remote. My voice when I began was calm but assured. "Let's talk about protecting what you've earned without the jargon they like to use to keep you guessing." The slideshow advanced with a soft click. Charts simplified, bullet points clear. I pointed out red flags in 401k statements, explained how to spot predatory fees without drowning in numbers, and showed how to read bank notices without panicking at every line. The group leaned forward, nodding, murmuring. A retired couple in the front row, their matching cardigans brushing when they leaned together, smiled as the wife whispered, "Someone finally explains this without talking down to us." I caught her husband's nod, his knuckles relaxing around the pen he'd been gripping too tightly. The room was alive in a way that didn't require noise, just the quiet rhythm of people finding clarity where they'd felt small before. Selma's pen tapped softly against her clipboard as she jotted notes for the next session. Her brow relaxed. Lips curved in a faint smile. Outside, through the tall windows, I noticed a familiar black sedan idling by the curb. Caden. His silhouette was sharp against the spring sunlight, his face unreadable as he lingered, one hand resting on the wheel. He didn't come in, he didn't need to. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. The session wrapped with handshakes, polite laughter, and the rustle of pamphlets slipping into tote bags. Selma stacked the leftover printouts neatly, while I powered down the projector, the faint whir fading to silence. A few attendees lingered to thank me, their voices low but genuine. One man, white hair tousled, shook my hand firmly. "You've done more good in an hour than my broker did in a year," he said. I nodded, not for praise, but because it felt good to know these skills still built something beyond my own survival. An hour later, the Maserati hummed along the Rhode Island coast, its engine low and smooth beneath the quiet saxophone flowing from the radio. The lilacs blooming along the roadside brushed the air with a sweet, fleeting perfume. As I rolled the window down, the hiss of the surf growing louder as the road curved toward the beach. I pulled over by a quiet stretch, where the sand met the rocks, the tide low and steady. The sky arched wide and bright, a pale blue canvas, brushed by wisps of cloud. I stepped out, the salt air cool on my face, and walked to where the waves kissed the shore. The Maserati's hood caught the sun, a glint of red against the pale landscape, but my eyes were on the water. The breeze carried the faintest chill, the kind that reminded you spring, still had teeth, but it felt clean alive. I closed my eyes and drew in a slow breath, the air tasting of brine and possibility. 62 isn't an ending, I murmured, the sound barely louder than the surf. It's a clean ledger. When I opened my eyes, the horizon stretched unbroken, the line between sea and sky sharp and inviting. Behind me, the faint hum of the car's engine and the gentle thread of saxophone waited. I turned back, glancing once at the open road curling along the coast, the sun glinting off the Maserati's hood. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of lilacs again, and for a moment the road ahead felt as wide as the ocean itself. The last light of day spilled across my apartment, catching on the framed deed and family photo that now felt less like shields and more like anchors. Watching those two simple things, once hidden and boxed away, stand whole again reminded me that control isn't just about holding on. It's about choosing what to build next. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can see which ones deserve rebuilding and which roads are better walked alone. At 62, I learned that dignity can coexist with forgiveness, and even with a touch of jazz. On the radio, life feels brand new. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise?